This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 170.
And, it's something that all of our children deserve the right to be able to read and write. And I worked very hard for that growing up.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Erman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Anthony. Thank you for being here, Swan.
Good.
How you doing, my man?
I'm doing well. Good to be here. Thank you for allowing me to co-host this with you.
Absolutely. I know that's a phrase you love to use with your teachers, and it's something that I've been mixing in a little bit as I walk around and greet all the classrooms each and every day. So thank you for being here. You don't have to be here.
This is true. Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So what did you think of our conversation tonight? We had Aimée Couto on, who is the 2024 Rhode Island Teacher of the Year.
I think it was a great conversation. Her passion spews over into her conversation. And so being able to hear from her and glean from her how she allowed the passion of literacy to help drive who she is as an educator, it just spoke a lot of volumes to me, and what she's doing in Rhode Island, as well as what she's ready to do nationally too. So,
yeah, definitely. I think we've had this before, and she brought the perfect blend of passion, of joy, of being very student centered in what they need as human beings, but also a lot of strong pedagogy in the conversation as well. And I think it's just the perfect blend for teachers to listen to, be reminded of what we can do to emotionally support our students, but what we can also do to be instructionally sound educators, because we have to have that combination, right? We can't just love kids. That's not enough. That's the foundation, and that's the starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And strong pedagogy will never recover from not showing students that love and that care. And so I think she is a good reminder of how to create that beautiful blend between the two.
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
All right, so we're not going to delay any further. Let's hear from the Teach Better Network and jump right into that conversation with Aimée Couto.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Aimée. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me tonight.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for this conversation. So please kick things off for us nice and simple. Officially introduce yourself. Let us know where you are coming from and give us a snapshot of what your career in education has looked like.
Awesome. So I'm Aimée Couto. I am the 2024 Rhode Island State Teacher of the Year. But even more importantly, I'm a first grade teacher in East Providence. And my journey into education was not what I thought was typical, but as I'm meeting more educators, I'm finding there's a lot of us that this is our second career. So I grew up in a family of lots of educators. And if I knew anything when I went to college, it was that I was not going to be a teacher because that's what everyone did. And I was going to do something different and exciting. And when I graduated a couple of years after working in what I like to call the business world, I realized that kids were calling me. And they needed me, and they needed to have me share my story of my education journey through my teaching with them.
Excellent.
So went back and got in the classroom.
I love it. So two things to start off. One, I will selfishly say I'm really excited to have you here from Rhode Island, as I shared with you when we were messaging. When I first started, I wanted to talk to a teacher in every state and that's still a goal of mine, even though I'm not actively, pinpointing the map of where we haven't talked about. We have not talked to a Rhode Island teacher yet, so I'm happy to have you here just for that little little piece. But we've had a few educators on who did not start their career in education, and the school I'm working at now, I actually just recently had a conversation with a teacher who didn't start, actually two teachers who didn't start their career in education, and I think that you bring such a profound perspective to the classroom, because a very common phrase you'll hear in classrooms, especially as you reach later elementary and definitely middle school and high school, is, well, in the real world. And then there's something that follows that. And most teachers have never been in the real world. We go to school, to become teachers, and then we go to school again as teachers. So what is something that please share what you did, if you're comfortable with that, what you did before education, and what is something that you feel you gained from that experience that has bled into your classroom and is still, you maintain that perspective that you feel is so vital to your classroom that you wouldn't have had if you just jumped right into education.
Yeah, so I was a business manager for a local Rhode Island company. And so I did a lot of accounts managing, collecting, things like that. And I think that what I bring into the classroom is that there's time to do lots of things. There's times to have lots of different ambitions, and we don't have to always decide from the get-go what we want to do and then just go with that. We can make changes, and we can change our direction, and we can follow our heart and everything. And I think that I bring that not just into my classroom, but I'm a mom too. And I bring that into my own children's lives, that we don't, everything we do, like I wouldn't change anything. I look back, I wouldn't change anything, any steps I've taken, because from every experience I've had, I've learned a tremendous amount. And I think I needed to do that to really, truly realize that there were parts of my education, parts of my story growing up, things that I went through and that I dealt with as a student, that I needed to go into the classroom so that I can make sure that this generation is not going through those things in the classroom.
So looking at where you're at now, what is a value that you developed early in your career that continues to be a part of your classroom today? And please, I'm sorry if I missed it, but just clarify, what you teach, what grade levels, and what that experience has been.
So I'm a first grade teacher, and I would say literacy, every student, every child, every person needs that. We need to we need to ensure that they're all achieving that, no matter what they bring with them into the classroom. And I think that that's something that I stand on all the time. You need to have literacy to be able to apply for a job, any job. I don't care what job it is. If you can't read the application, you can't apply for it. And it's something that all of our children deserve the right to be able to read and write. And I worked very hard for that growing up. I wore a lot of labels that were not always the kindest labels from teachers, because reading didn't come naturally. And so I was labeled a struggling reader from the get-go very early on. I was called lazy a lot. And when I look back at myself, I was anything but lazy. As a child that did not truly learn to read until the end of elementary school, I was working hard. I was working harder than any kid sitting around me. So to say I was lazy because the words, when I looked at the paper, the words didn't make sense, wasn't the truth. So I bring that into my classroom. I do everything I can to not label any of my students, to make sure that when they come in every single day, it's a brand new day and they get to make the best out of every opportunity they have put in front of them that day. I think it's very important that we do that and that we constantly lift our students up and encourage them to be the best that they can be always. And we take away the fact that they might struggle in an area, or they might have to work a little bit harder, or things like that. We need to have their insides have to be full, and they have to feel good about what they're doing and who they're becoming. So I think that that's the big thing I bring into my classroom and always do. Let's not label anyone. Let's just let them be who they are and encourage them to continue being who they are.
I actually love that, Aimée. I love the fact that you don't label students because, in education, sometimes when teachers are talking, they do label.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
about how you can look at another teacher's role and say, "Oh, you getting him, you getting her." Let me tell you, but you have you're developing your own narrative with that student, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's imperative. I think that it's wonderful that you hone in on the literacy part, because there are students who hate reading.
Mm-hmm.
But if they have one teacher that's able to speak into them and believe in them and encourage them to do what they need to do, I think that will change the way that they look at literacy and not feel like it's boring. You can go so many places in literacy that you can't go in other subjects. And so I always tell my students that literacy or reading is the only subject that gives you the answer. You just got to look for it.
Right.
Or it gives you the clues that will lead you to the answer. Um, and so I kind of pose it like that for my struggling readers or those that struggle with literacy where I'm at. And it changes their mindset because they realize, like, you are right. The only thing I got to do is search
Mm-hmm.
for it, and that's in the passage. And it just changes the trajectory of what they think about literacy. So I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I say,
And
oh, sorry.
go ahead,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Ken. I was going to say, I love how you said about the whole, like, I really do try to give each of my students when they come in, especially in the start of the year, like a blank, like slate. We get these packets from the teachers the year before, and they're like, what all do you want in there? I'm like, their name. If
Yeah.
they have a nickname and they want me to call them a certain name, like, that'd be great too. But other than that, like, I'm gonna learn who they are. They're gonna learn who I am. That's part of school. That's part of the whole, the whole year. The whole thing is building these relationships with our students, and allowing our students to see that we're human too, right? So, students can have a hard day, but the best thing is tomorrow's a new day. Teachers
Hmm.
have hard days. There are challenges in education, but the best thing is we get to go home, reflect, and go back in the classroom the next day and do it
Yes.
better, and everything. So, I really try to do that, is just allow them to grow every day and just be who they are.
Yeah, I wish every educator had that mindset. If every educator had that mindset, some students' lives would be so much better,
Yes.
because you have those educators who judge students because of their culture or their background, or because they had a hard time in kindergarten. That doesn't mean they're going to have a hard time in first grade.
Right.
You know, different teachers click with different children, but it boils down to a relationship. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if students love you and they know that you love them, they'll do anything for you.
Yeah.
But the moment a student sense, I always say that students have a sixth sense. They can sense when an adult don't like them.
Yes.
And And if they know that you don't like them, I'm not going to respect you. I'm not going to do what you asked me to do. I'm not going to read. I'm not going to do my math. I'm going to continue to act out because I know you don't like me and therefore I don't like you. But I think if all teachers would have that mindset, it would make a great difference.
And I think there's a way to develop a healthy balance because I agree, Ame. As a fifth grade teacher for a long time, I would get, the packet or the index card or whatever on every student. And I can honestly say I never looked at them once, any year that I taught. But I'm currently an interim elementary principal, and I've been a part of a lot of,
Awesome.
a lot of child study. We have what we call a child study team. We've been in a lot of conversations about things that we've implemented for students over the course of the year. I should say the teachers have implemented, and what has worked well, what has not worked well, what are still some struggles they see with these particular students, and starting those conversations for next year. And so I think it's important for these students to have a blank slate, to have an opportunity to show that they've matured or they've grown, or maybe they haven't, right? And I think every teacher needs to approach their new students with that open mind, and not labeling and judging the students before they walk in. But at the same time, as a school team, having good documentation of what has worked and what it hasn't worked. And so when those students do fall into those same rhythms, they, as a teacher, you're not starting over. So you don't have, you're giving the students a blank slate, but you kind of have the answer booklet, tucked away and ready to go, so that you can say, okay, when the student displayed these behaviors, these strategies worked well. So let's try these again and see if we can get that student back on that same trajectory. But I would kind of compare it to scaffolding whenever I've worked with teachers as an instructional coach, trying new projects, especially where students are kind of going on this open-ended path, and we have a goal in mind. I would always tell them, have 0 scaffolds in place when we launch this project. Let's see where the kids stumble and fall, and then we can insert scaffolds. But if we start with too many scaffolds, we'll never see where they could have actually figured it out on their own or taken the project in a different path. So I think it's really important to have a healthy balance of that. I'd love your opinion and just thoughts on how you do have that mindset of letting these first graders show you who they are, but how you also utilize the kindergarten teachers as a healthy resource as the year progresses.
Yeah, and I think I'm a member of my MTSS team at my school, and I like to think of myself as like a good think partner with teachers in my building, and everything. So I see the value in when interventions are put into place, or systems are put into place for students' success, that we can continue those. But and there's also sometimes there's sensitive information that as teachers we need to be aware of, right? So we have to take that into account. But I think when I think of it, like, what I don't want to hear is, oh, that they can't read, they can't do this, they can't, oh, this one's wonderful, she'll sit and listen to you all day. Like, I don't want to hear that. Like, if there's things that I need to have in place for this student to be successful, I need to know that as a teacher. That's important for us to know. If there's a background, a backstory that I need to know, if there's information that I need to know, baggage that this child, I mean, it's so sad to say, right? I work with 6 and 7-year-olds, and they have challenges and baggage that they bring with them into the classroom. I need to know those things. But I also, when I hear these things, I also have to remember that they're 6 and 7. So any way that they present because of these other, challenges in their lives, it's not their fault. They're 6 and 7. Like, it's not their fault. So at the end of the day, I think it's so important that teachers always find a way to be open arms to our students. and to be open-minded to our students and always have an open heart to our students. We need to be that role model, right? We need to display kindness. We need to display respect, because when we show those skills, it helps our students to show those skills, because we don't know what happens when they leave our building. We do a lot of talking in our classroom about how, oh, well, okay, so you do that at home? Great. That's fine. At home, we can do that. But in our classroom, let's look at our expectations and what we've come up with, and do those fit into our expectations or fit into what we want to do in school and in our classroom? Does that make it a safe environment for all of us? So I think that I never want a child to feel bad or negative about, where they come from either, and we behave differently in all different situations. And, I teach littles. They're not babies, but they're little kids. And we need to let them be little kids. I mean, I know I've learned some of the greatest things in life because I've made some crazy mistakes, but I learned from them and then I move forward. I have no problem making a mistake in front of my students and saying, "Oh, I made a mistake, but now I've learned, and now I can move forward." And I want them to have that same, attitude. Like, we're going to make mistakes in life. That's normal. That's human nature. But we can take those mistakes and we can learn and grow from them. I always say to my students, when you come in the classroom or when you go into school, so many doors are open to you, so many opportunities. So those doors are like opportunities for them to do all these different things. Our choices will either keep those doors open or close them.
Mm-hmm.
But if a door closes, we can learn from that and create another door to open. So I just never want my students to feel like that it's the end all be all. I think that's, kids have enough stress in their life. The school doesn't need to be one. School needs to be a place where they want to come, where they, literacy is a huge part of who I am. But along with that is let's get developmentally appropriate in our classrooms so that our students can truly be kids. They're kids. I mean, fifth graders are still kids, and they need those opportunities to be able to be kids. So, I really try, to take that kind of approach too with, within the classroom, that, life is stressful. And the last thing our students need is to come to school and have anxiety because they're walking into a classroom. They should be excited to walk into that classroom. And if they're not, as a teacher, I'm going to reflect and look at myself in the mirror and say, what is it that I can do? Something I'm doing right now is I'm interviewing my students, and I'm asking them, if they think I'm a good teacher. And of course, they're 6 and 7. They're like, "You're the best. We love you." I'm like, "Well, next year I want to be a better teacher. So what can I do to be a better teacher?" Because I want them to see that I'm always trying to grow and learn, and be better, in this profession.
I think that's so good that with the reflective lens,
Mm-hmm.
it's good that teachers are reflective and can be reflective and know that we're not perfect. And I also
Right.
think that it's good that students see that we're not perfect and they see that we are human, because it poses us in another light for them. It actually makes us connect better with them.
Yes.
In my professional opinion, have you ever been to the store and you've seen a student out and they look like, what, you don't live at school? It's kind of like that, like when we pose to them that we're not perfect and we make mistakes or we apologize to them. It's
Right.
like, what, you apologize to me? But it causes for them to trust you because
Hmm.
they see, okay, you respect me enough to tell me that you wronged me, and so you apologize to me in front of all of my peers. I can respect you.
Hmm.
I can respect that. And so I'm going to do what you asked me to do because I know that you love me.
Right.
So I think that's awesome.
Yeah. I
Aimée,
think it's so important.
You mentioned about developmentally appropriate
Hmm.
with the students that we're working with. What is something, and maybe you don't have an example of this, but I'll throw it out there anyway. What is something that you feel maybe you were doing in your first or second year that you later reflected on and said, that's an unfair expectation for a 6 or 7 year old, your first graders? What is something, and what is something maybe that you do hold for your students that you feel is age appropriate, even if it may be a little bit of a higher expectation?
Mhm. Well, I feel that I do hold my students to a very high standard. I always want their best. Absolutely. They should be giving their best in everything we do in the classroom. And I'm not willing to negotiate that. So if I know you can do better, I'm going to push you to do better. Because I'm never going to let them settle. Because the minute I let them settle, then I lose that perseverance, right? We have to find that sweet spot, that spot where it's like not so easy, but not so hard that they're giving up, right? We have to, and that's hard, and I wouldn't say that I'm great at it, but it's something that I'm always trying to do. I think that a lot of curriculums that are out there right now. I think that we as teachers have to always use our best professional judgment of what students need for movement and what learning looks like and sounds like. So when I started, I thought a quiet classroom is a learning classroom, right? If they're all at their seats and they're sitting there quietly and they're doing their work, I'm doing an awesome job. And I would say now, if you came by my classroom, we're not quiet, but there is so much learning going on. So when just because there's noise, that expectation of, nope, you have to work quietly. But just because there's noise doesn't mean that there's not a whole lot of learning going on. The conversations that they're having, um, the things that they're talking about, you'd be surprised that, they're usually really on task and they're talking about what they're doing and it's relevant to what's going on in the classroom. So I think that that's a big thing that we put on our students, that the expectation that if you're quiet and you're sitting in your seat, you're doing a great job and you're, a great learner. Where that's not, it's not a realistic expectation
It's
to put on our
compliance.
students, and it's not it's not a realistic expectation to put on, and it's also not something that is truly showing that they're learning just because they're quiet.
They're just showing that they're compliant.
Mhm.
Exactly. And
I
I think that that's a real big thing. Like, I talk a lot about that. Are we teaching compliance, or are we teaching students to grow and
yeah
and
we,
learn?
we have a couple primary classrooms in the building I'm in right now with, well, honestly, all the teachers are fantastic, but a couple primary teachers do a great job of getting the kids moving and active. And when I was there early, so I started there in late December, I would go into a classroom that's just buzzing with energy. Kids are doing Hot Wheels cars experiments and playing in centers and doing different things. And the teachers were like, I swear, like, they are learning. I was like, if I didn't see this, I would be concerned. Like, this is what this is what I want to see. This is what I hope my own kindergarten son is experiencing right now in his own classroom. So if they were all sitting in their seats quiet, I would be concerned about what's going on in your classroom, because that's the opposite of what I think we should see in a primary classroom. At times there's obviously a time and place for everything.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's so important to just keep in mind that they are kids, and there's so many different ways for them to showcase learning and to become involved with the content that they're experiencing and how they're interacting with their peers, and just keeping that in mind, that if they're 6 years old, they've been alive for less than 100 months. Like, they've literally not been on this planet for even 100 months. And how many of those, they couldn't even speak, right? They couldn't even respond. You think of the first 12 months of your life. So they've really had so much little life experience.
Very true. Yeah. And I think the other thing, just to like piggyback on that, I think something else that I've learned the more I've taught, is that my students really love when I'm having fun with them. Right. So when I'm engaged in whatever it is we're doing, and when you set expectations of what the community is going to look like, and you allow your students to be a part of that, to help develop that, you give them time to practice it. I mean, in first grade, their favorite thing to do on Friday is play The Floor is Lava. And we are moving around that whole classroom. We are sitting on tables. We're, kneeling on chairs, and we're doing all that. And when the song is done, we are like, they know exactly what to do. They get everything all put back together. They're back in their seats, and they're ready for whatever it is next we're going to do in the classroom. So I think that when we allow ourselves to have fun with them, and that when we're doing things in the classroom, we get engaged and excited about it, it helps them to be engaged and excited about it.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. In the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned about the labels that we can put on students, and you shared about labels that you experienced as a child. I remember maybe 2 or 3 years into my career, I had a student who did not do well on a math test. And it was a student that struggled a lot, but also had times of great success in the classroom, and was a student who would always have his homework done and then would not have his homework done for a while, would do well on tests and study, and then not do well on tests and study. And he bombed the test. And I remember saying to him, why didn't you study? You had the study guide for a week. What were you doing? What was your reason for not studying? And he got really upset and said, I did study for this test and still failed it. And it was a moment where I realized that I wouldn't use the word label, but I did apply a label to him. I made an assumption about him, and I changed the way that I looked at that. I helped my students prepare and hold themselves accountable for studying, and how I knew what they studied and what they didn't study. And I developed a system out of that. But it was a moment where I realized that I made an assumption and an unfair judgment of that student. What would you say are the less common or less obvious labels that we can put on and Anthony, I'd love you to answer this question as well. What are those less common or less obvious labels that we can put on our students, either through the way we greet them, the way that we ask them questions, or the way that we give them directions, or the way that we redirect their behavior? What are those less obvious labels that we may be unintentionally applying to our students and demoralizing them throughout the day without even doing it on purpose or realizing what we're doing?
Wow, that's a tough one.
No cakewalk here.
I think so. So I think that one of the things that we always have to remember is tone, right? How I'm even approaching something. So what kind of tone am I using? I also think that if I taught older children, it wouldn't be the same, but I teach littles, so I stand taller than all of my students. So when I'm talking to them, you'll rarely see me standing up straight. you'll see me squatting. I always try to give them that power of being taller than me, because sometimes it's not even what I'm saying, it's the fact that I'm bigger than them when I'm asking them, a question or things like, or things like that. I think that though, like those immediately when I think about just in general, like those are two things to really take into account. So the tone, and and I think a lot of the labels that we give them, it's I don't know if they're necessarily like but labels, but we can assume a lot, right? So, we can assume a lot about a student because of how they, how they perform or how they enter into the classroom. And I think that we do as teachers, I think we do that a lot. I always say, like, a kid that falls asleep in my class, I never wake, because obviously they need sleep. Um, and and I think if I wake them up and I'm like, it's not time for school right now, it's not time to sleep right now, it's time for school, you need to be awake, but like, that's like, in my opinion, that's labeling the child in a way of not being active and not being following the rules and doing what they need to do. But really, if they're falling asleep, there's a reason why they're falling asleep. And we need, and that's more of the avenue I need to take in that situation. And usually because of the kids that I deal with, like the age wise, like sometimes it's asking them about their night and about what's going on at home and things like that. 6 and 7-year-olds are great. They'll tell me their whole life story. My favorite line with parents is, you believe 50%, I'll believe 50%, because I know everything about your household. But yeah, I'm trying to think, like, Anthony, you got any ideas? So give us some ideas of some labels that we probably don't even realize that we're putting out there.
So with certain educators, they automatically sometimes certain educators forget the behaviors or a type of communication, and so when students are acting out, they label the child as being a bad
Mm,
kid, um, not realizing that you can change that narrative if you just have a conversation with the kid and say, "Hey, what's wrong?
mhm.
What's why are you treating your teacher like?" And I find myself doing this even as an assistant principal when I have to remove students from the classroom. I don't automatically start fussing at them. I pull them in the office and I say, "What happened? What's wrong? Why are you upset?" Because I want them to have some autonomy in their voice. And then I want them to know that there's an adult in this building that's going to listen to you. And then 9 times out of 10, they will open up and say, I don't know how to read. And when in reading class, I hate reading.
Yep.
And so instead of them being the good student, their behaviors begin to, act out because they don't want to be embarrassed,
Right.
and they don't, so their behaviors are communicating that, but they don't know how to. And so I think sometimes educators can label students behavior by labeling them as bad kids. I
Mm-hmm.
always say there is no such thing as bad children. There are children that make bad choices. uh, and
Glad.
so I think sometimes we can forget that the behaviors do communicate something is going on and something is not right. And if you just get below the surface and below that iceberg of that student, you'll be able to find out what is happening so that you can adjust how you're serving that child. And a lot of times, um, we feel because we got to stay on pace with the curriculum. We got to make sure we meet this deadline. Or we have this state test that we have to take. No, none of that matters if you do not reach that child where they're at as a human first. You have
Right.
to humanize them first, and I think that's where a lot of the labels do come up in
Yeah.
education.
Yeah, I think you like when you said like, give them that opportunity, that voice. And I think that's so important. It's something I always try. I say like, as teachers, we have to be really great listeners.
Yeah.
And we have to take the time to listen and give our students a voice, because when we listen and give our students a voice, we're showing them that we value them.
Mm-hmm.
And when we show them that we value them, it builds them up, and it builds the trust between us, which actually allows them to be more active in their learning. But we have to be compassionate listeners. It's part of the job. It's something I do think it's something I always am trying to be a little bit better at, and always trying to think about how I can do that better, because we do have a lot of things we have to get done, and we do have these times that don't allow for me to just listen to that story. But even if it's just like that post-it that I'm like, all right, I'm gonna write this down. You know, Joey needs to tell me a story, and I'm
Yeah.
going to put this right here. And as soon as there is time, I'm going to come and bring you the post-it, and you're going to share your story with me because I want to hear it. But if I listen right now, I'm not going to hear it because I'm trying to take attendance, or I'm trying to do this, or we're in the middle of this. So just making sure that they know I value their voice. I value what they want to share, what they're going to tell me about. And I want to make sure that I give them the stage to do it on.
I think it's also really important for teachers, for administrators to not take the actions of students so personally.
Yeah.
And to realize that they might not understand why they're behaving the way they're behaving, or they're not doing it because of something you did, or even the lesson you have designed or the activity you have designed. They're still just learning how to appropriately navigate, and to not take it personally, and not just assume that the student is trying to be disruptive or trying to aggravate you.
Right.
And when you ask them why, or you try to get something out of them, they might not give it back to you. Right. It might take a couple days, or it might take another adult. I've had a few interactions where I feel like I got to the bottom of the behavior incidents that are happening in the building. And then the parent says to me, well, they explained this, this, and this. And it could be easy for me to say, well, they're just trying to not get in trouble and they're making up stories with their parents. Or I could reflect and say, well, was the student a little bit intimidated? Was the student a little bit uncomfortable or nervous about being in the principal's office and maybe afraid to say that? Right. And so I can circle back, and then I can listen to that part and talk with the student again. And so not taking it personally, I just think is something that we need to really reflect on ourselves, and always try to circle back to, how can I help this student achieve? How can I help this student overcome this moment of anxiety? How can I help this student overcome this moment of frustration that repetitively happens in the classroom, but maintain very high expectations for the kids? And you said that earlier, Aimée, of having those high expectations. Yes. And I think high expectations in first grade look different than they do in fifth grade. I think high expectations in my class look different than they do in Anthony's class. But I think it's one strategy that I have commonly used when I have a student who's being defiant or just not doing what is expected, is in the moment where they should be, for lack of a better term, getting in trouble, is completely removing that from the situation and doing something unrelated, silly, fun, whatever, to get them to lower their guard, to then engage back in that conversation that you're doing. So like recently I was doing relay races on the front bus platform with a student who was in my office because he wasn't doing any of his reading and his writing work and had to make it up during recess. But we went out and did that, and then came back in and were able to have a more reflective conversation. It took 2 minutes. It wasn't a reward. It was a brain break, right? But it was something that removed his guard to then allow that conversation to continue further. So I just think it's like you said, it's so hard. We have so many responsibilities as classroom teachers, and I don't think any teacher is purposely labeling or purposely not thinking about
No.
all perspectives involved. It's just something that we constantly have to have in the forefront as we're working with students.
Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned literacy as being one of your big passions.
Yeah.
What is a staple in your literacy block or classroom or weekly routine? What is a staple that you think is a very essential foundation for first grade classrooms when it comes to literacy?
Understanding how the brain learns to read. So it's so important that we know the process that the brain goes through when we're learning to read, and using that when we're exposing our students to sounds, to our phonemes, to our graphemes, and everything. So I am trained in the science of reading. I've gone through all the training. I'm also a local facilitator for letters. So I actually today I graduated my first cohort. So they just finished year 2 in the letters training. So that was very exciting. So I think really making sure that that we explicitly teach whatever it is we're covering. So whether it's a phoneme, so a sound that we're learning, a new sound that we're learning in the classroom, like explicitly teach that sound, give them a lot of information about it, where we're going to find it in a word, the different ways that they might see it spelled, and things like that. But then allowing my students to, for lack of a better word, play with it. So giving them time to practice. I think we forget about the importance of practice when we're teaching a lot of times, and practice needs to be paired with feedback, right? So if a student goes and practices something the wrong way, has no feedback, that's dangerous. So I think a staple to me is making sure that my students get lots of time to practice. I teach first grade, so again, like our phonics, our literacy block is really based around learning the 44 phonemes in our language, learning the most common ways that we're going to see those phonemes, learning how to blend sounds together, learning how to break sounds apart so that we can encode or spell words. But the biggest thing is that when whatever it is we're teaching, what if we're focusing on decoding fluency, or if we're focusing on encoding, spelling and writing, is giving our students time to practice those skills. So making sure that they have plenty of time to practice, because then they own them and then they know them, and knowing that they need multiple exposures, to whatever it is, the concept that we're learning.
What were some of your resources? So I'm thinking fifth grade teacher, I moved to teach first grade, right? Where I'm a newer teacher. Where can teachers go to be supported in exploring learning and learning more about that? Because I can say, as a fifth grade as a longtime fifth grade teacher, if I moved into a primary classroom, I would not be prepared to teach a lot of what you just mentioned and the science of reading and those really essential explicit skills as effectively as I should be able to, or as effectively as if I were your grade partner.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of resources out there that can help teachers. There's programs out there. UFly is one that is talked about a lot right now. It walks you right through every phoneme that you could explore. If we're looking at like the phonemic awareness part of it, Haggerty's a big buzzword right now in that primary classroom. But I think the thing is that with all of those, if we can use them as guides, but knowing our students and knowing what they need is really what's important. So I would say, as crazy as it might sound, there's a lot of resources on social media. So there's a lot of us out there, posting about different things that we do in our classroom, telling people, like, on average, students need 8 exposures to a word before they own it. And that's on average. So that's not every student in your class. There's going to be students in your class that need 12 or 15. And then there are some students that are going to get it in 6. And knowing how to go about exposing them, how to map words. The exposure isn't the flashcard of here's the word, say the word. It's more of like, let's listen to the sounds in the words. Let's attach a grapheme to those sounds. And going through those steps with our students, and allowing them to manipulate different materials to be able to see that, whether it's a chip that they're pushing to represent each one of those sounds, so they can see, oh, my word has 4 sounds, and now I have to represent each of those sounds with the grapheme, and writing it. So there are some great programs out there, but I also think that you can go on Pinterest, you can go on Instagram, and you can go on a lot of those other social media platforms, and you're going to find a lot of great teachers, phenomenal teachers out there, kind of just giving you short little bits of what you can bring into your classroom. And then you take those little bits and you make them, your own, and everything, and our clientele changes every year. So how I approach, everything every year is so different. But if you're a 5th grade teacher and you're going to go into a 1st grade classroom, I would just beg you to put a sound wall up. Don't do a word wall. Let's do a sound wall. And even in a 5th grade classroom, a sound wall would be a great addition to the room. It's amazing how we think, when I think back to like when I used to have a word wall in my room, and the kids would be like, Mrs. Couto, how do I spell say? And I'd be like, go look at the sound, go look at the word wall and find it. No, they can't go to the word wall and find it. They don't know how to spell it. And turning now, I have a huge sound wall in my classroom, and you could come in my classroom many times and just see a kid like gazing at it, and or laying on their belly and looking up and going back to their paper. And we learn how to use that sound wall to help us to spell words. When I get so excited to share sounds with my students. We get to talk about our articulators and what our mouths doing and our tongues doing and our lips are doing, and is our voice on or off, and it's I have so much fun doing it, because I didn't get that when I was in school, and I wasn't exposed to reading in this way, where it's fun and there's a lot of energy, and I get to see that light bulb just like light up when they read that word. It's there's nothing better than that, when they look at me and they're like, I read that, and you're like, yes, you did. Yes, you did. And that's just the first one, because get ready, you're going to be reading a lot more words than that.
Can you give me a little bit of a visual of the sound wall? Because I'm trying to imagine, and what I'm imagining is visuals to help us with all the sounds that consonants make, all the sounds that vowels make, both long and short. And then I'm envisioning, as you go over digraphs, you're adding those up to the sound wall. Can you kind of walk us through Just give us
Yeah.
like an elevator pitch on your sound wall.
Yes, so I love this. So yes, so sound walls, they have, so we have 44 phonemes in the English language, and our sound walls consist of all of those. And a lot of our phonemes or our sounds are partners. Right. So sounds are made by I call them our articulators. So by our mouths doing certain things, like our lips doing something, our tongue might be doing something, our teeth, where's the sound coming from? They're also by how the air is flowing. So like we could have a stop where that's like a sound like that we can't like carry on in forever. So like the sound b, right? B. I can't say that forever, right? But there, like the sound v, I can hold that for a long time. So talking about like those kinds of different things. So there's lots of ways you can lay it out. I have mine laid out where we focus more on what our mouth looks like. So that's at the top of my sound wall, is what our mouth looks like. So, is our mouth open? Are our lips together? And then I pair them. So like P and B are together because we form those sounds exactly the same. It's just a difference of having our voice on or off. T and D are together because those are made exactly the same except for our voices on or off. I pair them together so that because you'd be surprised how many kiddos might mistake those partners, and they're mistaking them because they're not feeling that their voice is on or their voice is off. And everything. But like they can also look, at the top. So like, if they're saying a sound like, I'll say, okay, well, what sound is it you're trying to spell? And they might go, this one. And I'm like, oh, so what are you doing? And they're like, I'm biting my tongue. And I'm like, oh, okay, so let's look and find it. And there's pictures of a mouth biting its tongue, and they can look there and see that and go right to the sounds we have that match that. So they can see, oh, it's TH, and then a lot of times they'll say, oh, that's right, Mrs. Couto, that's the one I get to stick my tongue out. That's the only time I get to stick my tongue out at the teacher, and things like that. But so that's how the consonants are displayed. And then QU and X are over on the side because those are actually two sounds to make the one. So they don't have a spot on the sound wall. They're over to the side. And then I do my vowel as a vowel valley. So it's kind of like almost like a V. And how it is it starts up at the top, like either side, our mouth is kind of closed. And as we get further down, our mouth opens more. And that's really great because like, especially in early elementary, we have a lot of kiddos that mistake certain vowels like E and I, very common when they come into first grade, not knowing the difference of that. But we can talk about what does our mouth look like when we say eh, as opposed to eh, right? Eh, I can fit my whole finger in eh, but when I say eh, I can just get my nail in. Or I can't, or my finger stops as soon as it hits my teeth. So they can start to see, so we can talk about that. Like, is your mouth open really wide when you're saying that? Is it not? And all of that. So they're able to use that to help with their spelling and also to help with their reading.
Mm-hmm.
So I and it's amazing when we do that my students are able to spell these really big words because they have the tools that they need at their fingertips to spell it. And I think back to me, like when I was their age and I wanted to spell a really big word, they were like, go find it in the dictionary, which is just so like, now it's like so baffling because I'm like, a dictionary is only good if I know how to spell.
Yes.
or you're close enough, like when you're trying to type it onto a computer and just hope that you're close enough that it will correct you to the actual version.
Yeah. Well, we do talk a little bit about that, right, in the classroom, because while we have 44 phonemes, a lot of those phonemes, the way we can spell those phonemes, we can spell them multiple ways. You think about all the different ways we can make different long vowels in our language, or even the hard k sound, the multiple ways that we can represent it. So when I am sharing with them more than one way to spell or to represent a phoneme, I'm always like, these are spelling options, right? They're spelling options. And in first grade, if they're using a spelling option, I'm like, all right, we've got this, because it's a step in the right direction to get them to where they're going to know which spelling option's the right one to use.
Definitely. And I can only imagine how important dental and hand hygiene is in your classroom, with all of the analyzing of mouth and measuring your mouth with your
I teach
fingertips.
First grade, please. I'm wash and wear. No matter what I do, I'm wash and wear.
Absolutely.
And I'm a hugger. I hug my students. I love my students. That's one thing I will not give up.
Absolutely.
I will not give up, because they need that. They need that. So I come home with snot and drool and a little bit of leftover lunch from them and all of that. And that's great. It's all good stuff.
All the good stuff. So I really don't want to cut this conversation short, but I wanted to jump into our exit ticket, which are the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. So question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Listen to them and give them a voice.
Love that.
Also, short but powerful. Okay, so what is the best advice you ever received from a colleague, a principal, or student? Or
this too shall pass. So I think that everything, including our kiddos, like everything that we're going through, we get to feel all different emotions through our life. We get to feel the highs, we get to feel the lows, but this too shall pass. So when a student's struggling, when a student's having a hard time, when the day is hard for them, letting them know that this will pass and that things are going to get better. But in the same way, when we are at a high and opportunities are abundant and we're living large, we need to be present and enjoy it, because this is going to pass as well. So I think that that's probably the best advice I've been given.
I love that. So we know that the school year goes in waves, and there are days that we struggle to survive as educators. What is something that you could, or some form of advice that every educator needs to hear in order to power up in the moment of their struggle?
Give yourself grace. Be patient and give yourself grace. We're humans. We are not robots. And we have difficult days, and we have amazing days. But when you have that difficult day, when you have that moment of doubt, when you feel like it didn't happen today, to give yourself grace, take time to reflect. And the best part about it is you get to go in there the next day, try it again.
Yeah.
No harm. There's no harm. If we learn from it, if we can do it better, if we can always be reflective, we're moving in the right direction.
Yep.
I recently said that to a newer teacher, that I think being reflective is the greatest quality an educator can have. And again, like you said, as long as you're not actually physically harming them or causing them mental stress, and you reflect on a lesson and realize you could do X, Y, and Z different or better, or just try it to see if it makes a different impact, then that's fine. You have plenty more years and opportunities to do that. And hopefully, 30, 35 years of a teaching career to improve 30 or 35 times. So kind of on that note, it's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What do you think separates the teachers who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, or adopt new teaching strategies?
Well, I think that you hit it. Like those that are willing to be innovators are those that will consistently grow, learn, and be willing to ask questions, be willing to collaborate, are willing to go find the answer when they don't know it. I think that that's such an important piece. I've had the opportunity recently to talk to a lot of graduating pre-service students, so college students getting ready to go into the field, and I base my talk around three things: passion, empathy, and innovation. And we need those. Those are the three things that we need. And when we have those, we're reflective. When we have those, we'll power through. If you have those three things, you're going to always be a step, making steps in the right direction, and you'll always move forward. Education is forever changing, so we have to change with it.
This has really just been such an enjoyable conversation. I can't thank you enough for doing this with us. It's very evident why you were the Rhode Island Teacher of the Year, and why your first graders are so lucky to have you on a daily basis. Sorry, Anthony, I got too excited. I cut you off before we could ask that final.
Now, so how can your audience, or how can the audience connect with you, Aimée?
Well, I'm on Instagram, Mrs. Couto's Corner, so definitely can connect there. And I'm also, they can reach me through my email. So aCouto@epschools.ri.com, can definitely reach me there. But I'm on my Instagram account. I'm always trying to share different things to get teachers to think a little bit more about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Can you share your email one more time?
Yep. So it's Couto, so ACOUTO at epschools with an S, RI.com.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we will link up to your Instagram and your email in our show notes, which you can find wherever you're watching or listening. So I thank you again. This has really just been such an enjoyable conversation. And Anthony, why don't you take us on out of here?
All right. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Powered Up on tonight with the 2024 Rhode Island State Teacher of the Year. Aimée, it's been a pleasure being able to hear your pedagogy and being able to hear your passion for your first grade students as well as for this profession. And we just thank you for joining us on tonight.
Thank you guys. Thanks so much for having me.